Senator Kamala Harris wants the president removed from Twitter, but some of her colleagues are scoffing at the idea. Plus, presidential hopeful Senator Elizabeth Warren, she's unveiled a new tax on excessive lobbying.
We're back with Colin Rojero, Democratic strategist, and Inez Stepman, senior policy analyst at the Independent Women's Forum.
Love the flair on that Rojero,
like
but
thank you.
We got. I mean, so this is interesting. Kamala Harris, she wrote this two-page letter to Jack Dorsey, asking the president to basically, asking them to ban President Trump from Twitter for violating the terms of user agreement service. Seems like a desperate ploy, in my opinion, to remain relevant and grab some headlines. However, some of her opponents in the race also responded to this. Senator Elizabeth Warren and Tulsi Gabbard. Let's take a listen.
I think freedom of speech is something that is an important foundational right in our democracy. I think that the things that are coming from Donald Trump are things that are inciting a lot of divisiveness in our country, though, and this is one of the many reasons why I believe it's important that voters vote to defeat Donald Trump.
Senator Warren, really easy one. Should Donald Trump be banned from Twitter?
No.
All right.
What did you make of that? I honestly loved that. It was like, and that's the thing, if you're running to beat somebody, trying to get them banned from Twitter is just such like a mealy-mouthed referee type thing to do.
It really is. It's not inspiring at all.
Right.
I think, look, and if I am a Democratic strategist or someone who's trying to ring swing voters, why would I want to take away the best attack ad I have, which is Donald Trump on Twitter? I would never take that away from him. And personally, I love the entertainment of it, but I think it's kind of a silly, sideways attack that's not going to really have any resonance.
That's the thing is, not only did Kamala do this, but Kamala's advisors are getting mad at Tulsi Gabbard, Inez, for saying that she believes in freedom of speech for Twitter. I mean, I think that is just such a desperate. I mean, obviously, they're still very upset about what happened on that debate stage and effectively ending her candidacy. But really, I mean, I just thought it was such a lame intra-party attack.
Look, it's just trying to get away from the Kamala's a cop thing.
Yeah.
This is not the way to do it.
Twitter, that's even a lamer cop. You're looking at Twitter cop.
Twitter cop is even worse.
Kamala hall monitor.
But I do think this highlights a really interesting void that's opened up in the Democratic Party and among the left in general. For example, 41% of Gen Zers don't believe that hate speech, quote unquote, whatever that is protected or should be protected. Right? Free speech used to be something that the left and the right agreed on. You have your Bill Maher's and your sort of provocateurs on the left, and then you had a very strong conservative support for free speech. This used to be something we could get along, this small L liberal idea that we need to, as a country that is a republic and has to debate these things, that we need to have these things out in the open. Now, I know that there's no direct First Amendment issue with Twitter, but this does speak to the culture of free speech and how that consensus, I think, is breaking down.
Yeah. Well, I do want to stick up for the Gen Z attitude just for 1 second. I don't agree with it, but I do think we should appreciate where it's coming from. The time that you're talking about was a time when you had mainstream media gatekeepers who wouldn't let Nazis into the public square. They weren't going to get onto the pages of the New York Times or get onto the evening news. And Gen Zers have grown up in a fractured media world where the most outlandish people like Alex Jones and others are mainstreamed into their lives. And so there's no way, there's no mechanism anymore, no gatekeepers to keep these people out of public life, and so they're trying to figure out ways on their own to keep Nazis out of public conversation. And I sympathize with that goal. I think that it's going to wind up backfiring on them, but I do think you have to understand the changing media narrative.
So I push back against this a little bit because I think that basically takes the view of the last 30 to 40 years. Certainly in the 19th century, our media was actually more rough and tumble than it is now. And actually during the Founders' time, there were stricter libel laws, so that actually the media was less rough and tumble during the Founders' time when they wrote the First Amendment. But throughout the 19th century, you literally had papers attached explicitly to parties, and I mean the kind of things that people printed were make our time
people
look.
Forget that yellow journalism
people think that this is the rudest or the
time.
Most fractured time ever, and I think that the First Amendment was designed exactly to deal with even a very fractured and very lack
I
of
want to get you in here
gatekeeper
quickly.
landscape.
Would Gen Z know or be pushing hard so back against it if it hadn't been allowed to percolate by itself?
Right.
I'm for the percolation of it. Let people know what's out there. Let people know that racism still exists. Let people know that these societal problems or different points of view exist so that we can fight back against them.
Yeah,
That's the only way to
would
know that
just
they
say
exist and they're not under the surface anymore.
It's complicated because this is a consequence of the democratization of the internet, right? Like, so that means that everybody gets a shot, and part of that means that everybody includes a lot of racists, and like, that's part of the issue.
Yeah, it makes Kamala and other Democrats who agree with that look weak. Like the guy, you ban him from Twitter, he still has the nuclear codes. He's still commander-in-chief.
He's the president of the United States.
I'd rather
throws
not
around,
know what he was
like-
thinking.
The funny thing about it is I think Donald Trump called for people to be banned from Twitter
true,
before. And so why is she getting in the Donald Trump train that we should ban people
We
from
should
Twitter?
also mention, I mean, to get a little bit into policy here without our dear friend Crystal, but Senator Elizabeth Warren, she's released a new plan in order to tax excessive lobbying. So the specifics of the plan say she's going to impose a 35% tax on lobbying expenditures totaling between $500,000 and $1 million. Now, I don't feel like anybody could actually be against that, but Inez, is there any argument against it?
There are two.
Yeah.
One, it is likely unconstitutional.
I'd heard that one. I knew that was coming.
As much
Yeah.
as I would like to tax, for example, Thomas
Right.
Friedman by the word, that you can't actually tax
That would be good for
speech,
us
right,
all.
past a certain point. So that's one very serious argument
Yeah.
against it. And the second one is it's a little bit selective. So I've noticed that this plan, it does cover a lot of typical lobbying organizations. It's curiously silent on 501c5. That would be the unions that spent $1.7 billion in 2016. In comparison, the Chamber of Commerce, one of the biggest lobby firms on sort of the business side, spent a paltry $105 million during the same cycle. So there's a lot of money in politics that comes from unions, and this is curiously, this seems a little one-sided.
Yeah, but that's not exactly a fair comparison because you're lumping all unions together, which don't always agree and lobby for different things all the time, versus consumer groups or corporate, trade industry groups like pharma, who spends much more or close to what unions do. So, let's just talk about it and level the playing field here. I don't think it's a bad idea. Is it unconstitutional? Probably. Will it pass? Probably not.
Right.
But is it a good idea and a good policy platform if you want to say, hey, my job and my candidacy is to restore the power of the government to you, so we're going to take the influence of corporate dollars at least out of the legislative process.
But the same people that say that it's unconstitutional would probably say that the entire Lobbying Disclosure Act is unconstitutional, that you have a First Amendment right to petition the government, and all these disclosures and all these requirements that you register who you're lobbying for are themselves unconstitutional. I think it actually goes back to more what does the Constitution say rather than who controls the Supreme Court. The current Supreme Court, yes, probably unconstitutional. Supreme Court that Elizabeth Warren says she'd construct or Bernie Sanders would construct would actually be fine with something like and say like, okay, you as an individual, sure. You have the right to bear arms. You have the right to bear a handgun. You have the right to write a letter to Congress. You can walk into Capitol Hill. But there's nothing in the Constitution that says you have the right to spend unlimited amounts of money hiring former members of Congress to do your lobbying for you.
And I think, there would be a large argument on whether or not it's constitutional and how it would apply and how it would eventually become law. But I think from a perspective of a campaign,
It's a signal. It's a signal that I care about money in politics. I want to give you a quick chance to respond to
with regard to money in politics, I mean, of course, Elizabeth Warren, I actually think this is one of the places where she is vulnerable to charges of hypocrisy, right? She famously, she signed this pledge not to take big dollar donations, but she transferred a lot of money from her Senate campaign where she took big dollar donations.
And hasn't ruled it out in the future.
And has
She
not
hasn't
ruled it
said
out.
she's not taking big dollars. She said she won't do the fancy fundraisers.
Right.
She hasn't said she won't call people and ask for big dollars.
But and even that, but I mean, she is running on a platform saying that money in politics is a problem, and she seems to be skirting her own pledge in regards to previous money from her Senate campaign where she used those tactics. I think this is one of those consequences of a free society, right? There is no principled distinction between the money spent that Thomas Paine spent printing those pamphlets, common sense. Like, what if we put a limit on that? If he had spent, the equivalent of $30 million printing common sense and disseminating it to people, is that really different than hiring people? It's lobbying if it's your opponents, and it's public interest when it's your side.
We limit the amount of money that somebody can give to a federal candidate. We cap it. Right. $5,400 for primary and general. We've capped that. Like, there's no difference between the $5,300 and the $5,401, but we have said as a society that we want to limit that. And so I don't think you can say that $1 is equal to just any other dollar or any other billion dollars.
We have to leave it there. I'm very sorry. This is a really interesting discussion, though, and we're going to have both back. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
really
you.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Tomorrow on Rising, Republican presidential candidate Governor Mark Sanford. He's going to explain why he launched his primary challenge against President Trump. It'll be an interesting conversation.
And the Hill's editor-in-chief, Bob Cusack, brings us all the Washington news we didn't have a chance to cover this week.
As always, follow us on our social media channels. Send us your Rising Qs using the Rising Qs hashtag. Hit subscribe on our YouTube page. And Crystal's going to be back tomorrow. So we will see you guys tomorrow.
I won't.